So we last looked at the concept of the Enlightenment. Enlightenment mainly affecting the new middle classes amongst educated European males. When we look at FR, French Revolution, the French Revolution can be viewed as an extension of these Enlightenment ideas. So society and money, what caused the French Revolution? We'll dive straight in. LT means long term. And France was still operating under what was basically a feudal system. I mean, 1% and 2% make up 3%. They own the majority of the land and wealth. So we have the clergy, which is the first estate. Instead of upper class, they were called estates. So the first estate is the clergy, and then the landed nobles are the rest of the second class, or second estate. The third estate is the other 97%. So we find that it's a variety of people, the new bourgeoisie. So these were the middle class, people that were educated, they're intellectuals, merchants who are prospering, other professionals. They might be skilled craftsmen, but they're also peasants, serfs, who are tied to the land. So they own unreasonably high taxes to the crown. They have to pay the landlord, and it's required that they give 10% of their money to the Catholic Church. So right off the bat, they have to spend quite a bit of their money. Immediately, the French Revolution was caused by a lack of finances. Louis XVI comes to power in 1774, and the treasury was nearly empty. The 7 Years' War had drained it. And the decision to help the colonials, the decision to help us in the American Revolution was foolish and irresponsible. It wasn't great. His finance minister advised against it, but Louis wanted to see England suffer. He just couldn't help himself. So the common people ended up crushed by taxes. They were crushed while the nobility were shielded at the king's palace at Versailles and paid nothing. All right, there was a desire to tax the nobility, but that was met with stiff resistance. His wife, Marie Antoinette, is born in Austria. She's not viewed favorably because she's a foreigner and she likes to spend lots of money. So there's lots of debt. There's a drought which causes food prices to go up. So people don't have money and they can't eat. So they're hungry. When people don't have money and they go hungry, they're upset. That leads to problems. Now, to solve these problems, in 1789, King Louis convened the Estates Generales. And the Estates Generales was a legislative body in which all representatives from all three estates met together. This is 1789, and they haven't met since 1614, so this is seen as a drastic action. The provinces actually held elections for Third Estate delegates, and many of them ended up being middle-class professionals, not only inspired by the Enlightenment, but inspired by the American Revolution. And they collected notebooks full of ideas that would bring reform to France, such as forming a new legislative assembly. Now, the other two estates mostly wanted to keep the status quo. And Louis did increase the number of Third Estate representatives. There were 600 from the Third Estate, and that was the same number of representatives that the First and Second Estate combined got. That's where more power to get results comes from. But voting takes place by the orders, meaning one estate votes as a block. So there's 3 total votes. There's kind of a request to raise taxes on the nobility, but Louis knows it's not going to happen. The First and Second Estate always ganged up on the third. It was always a 2-to-1 vote. Now, Louis locked the Third Estate out of the assembly hall they had planned to meet in. So they met at an indoor tennis court in Versailles, and they vowed not to leave until France became a constitutional monarchy. That's where the tennis court oath comes from. These Third Estate representatives, these middle-class professionals, actually met in the indoor tennis court. Louis responded by calling upon 18,000 troops to defend his palace and arrest the National Assembly. That's what the Third Estate started calling themselves. They were known as the National Assembly. In this case, we can perhaps say that the revolution had started to begin. There was an inkling of revolution. Officially speaking, if you want to name a date, around this same time, revolts were taking place among the peasantry that changed the direction of it. With the National Assembly, it was more of a political revolution. Now violence comes into play. The commoners of Paris stormed the Bastille, and the Bastille was a medieval prison that also served as the armory. And they freed all 7 prisoners. There weren't that many. It was more of a symbol. They also hacked the commander of the Bastille to death. They decapitated him and paraded his head through town on a pike. This is definitely taking the protest in a totally new direction, and to this day, July 4th, 1789 is known as Bastille Day in France. Louis knows he needs to give in, so he decides to recognize the National Assembly. Now, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen was written at around this time and declared that all men are born free and with equal rights. They're also eligible for government positions via virtue and talent, and taxation needs to be applied equally. Other laws made it clear that the ideas of the Enlightenment, the ideas of the philosophies, are now becoming political law. Goodbye serfdom. The feudal system is gone. No more tithing. 10% of your money doesn't automatically go to the church because you technically don't have to be a member of the church. This also gave us the concept of conservatives, liberals, and moderates. Because within the National Assembly, conservatives were people who didn't want change, and they sat on the right side of the assembly. Liberals wanted radical change, and they were on the left. And moderates had opinions that could go either way. They sat in the middle. So we get modern political ideas from it. And the actual assembly was more in favor of political reforms and the establishment of a monarchy. But things are just going to continue to deteriorate. So summer of 1789, the Bastille is stormed. Fall of 1789, bread prices are incredibly high, and many peasants they don't trust the king anymore. They can no longer place their faith in him. So 20,000, mainly Parisian women, marched to his palace at Versailles. This is 12 miles outside of Paris. This March of the Women, as it's called, forces the king and his family to come back to Paris so the people can keep tabs on him. Now the king at this time was able to return with his life. The village-based peasants in the countryside took revenge on their lords, sometimes burning the rolls that listed feudal obligations, and at other times burning the country chateaus to the ground. The émigrés, the term you see here, the nobles, began to flee France. The people who fled were the émigrés, and they sought refuge with their noble relatives across Europe. So a great change is truly on the horizon. Sometimes great is positive, sometimes it's negative. It all depends on point of view. Now this new legislative assembly is going to follow the example of the United States with a written constitution. And they'll follow the example of Great Britain with shared power between a king and elected representatives. They tried a constitutional monarchy. France was not a republic at first. The problem is that the nobles who fled abroad are attempting to convince foreign kings to overthrow the revolution. There's a legitimate fear that the Habsburgs, who control Austria, are going to intervene because Marie Antoinette was Austrian. Anti-monarchy riots took place. Anti-monarchy riots took place. The time for compromise is over. A constitutional monarchy is seen as a failure. Now, King Louis attempted to flee Paris under cover of darkness, but he was discovered. He was captured. He's found guilty of treason and he's executed. He loses his life to the national razor, la guillotine. This becomes the symbol of France. And chances are, if you have a time frame known as the Reign of Terror, it's not positive. Right? The National Assembly becomes known as the National Convention, and it was under the control of radicals. The Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre. Their beliefs were liberty, equality, and fraternity, and they decided to completely transform society. The sweeping changes you see are that they confiscated all church land and all noble land. They abolished slavery in the empire, and everyone is equal, so they are addressed as citizen. These changes are going to alienate devout Catholics, and they're going to upset the middle class. All right? They'll upset the bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie want change, but not this much change. Now, the new Committee of Public Safety is going to act in the name of protecting France from external enemies. And mass conscription, conscripting people, forcing them to serve in the new French army, will help keep France safe and allow peasants to see the world for the first time. And they'll get this new identity as Frenchmen. La guillotine becomes the new symbol of the revolution, and the irony is that the philosophies despised public executions because they were grisly and usually took multiple swings of an axe to complete. You know, the machine is designed as an offshoot of the Enlightenment. Everyone gets executed equally. It's quick, clean, and swift, no matter what your social class is. Now, Robespierre gets power hungry. He turns on his supporters, like Georges-Jacques Danton. But once France is seen as safe, people are going to grow tired of the terror. They're sick of it. Most middle-class individuals want a more moderate republic. So Robespierre himself is beheaded. That brings the Reign of Terror to an end. So we see the spark that lit the revolution, both long-term and short-term. The immediate actions that set it off. We also acknowledge the fact that there were desires for legitimate reforms that often went, unfortunately, unheeded. That leads to the Reign of Terror and chaos within France.